So when we talk about the limbic system, we often think of triggers and things that trigger that fight, flight, or freeze. What does that look like with PTSD? What are the kind of things that trigger PTSD? And is it the same as other trauma, or are there kind of different ways that people may be triggered into really experiencing PTSD?
So I think that it has to do with the situation and the unique circumstances to what the person is dealing with. And that's always going to be a factor when we just talk about triggers in general.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that if you have something where, let's say that your spouse would go on business trips and they had affairs during that time, discovery and disclosure has happened, but yet their job still requires them to travel a lot to where, the partner can't see what they're doing or have any of control or whatever. That could be a huge trigger. But then if that keeps recurring, because it's almost like trauma builds on trauma, if so to speak, then that could actually lend itself more to somebody experiencing the full criteria of PTSD, where maybe if the spouse says, you know what, I know this happened in my job. I'm going to get a different job. I'm going to stay at home. I'm going to be home on weekends. I'm going to do these things because I want to, restore our relationship. Then the likelihood that they're actually going to end up in that, PTSD pool is going to be less likely. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is there anything that increases symptoms? I mean, that's something to thinking about, like maybe something triggers it and creates actually more trauma on top of the PTSD that already exists. Is that even a thing?
Yeah. And I think that that's sometimes what happens when we look at where they can say, okay, these are usually immediate responses. These are more delayed responses. And there can be a lot of overlap even with that. Mm-hmm. But let's say that you have a partner who discovery disclosure happens. The spouse is going to do all these things to change their behavior. They're going to work to restore the relationship. But then on the other side, you have another partner who their spouse has said they're going to do these things, but they're really not doing. And then a few months later, they end up separated. And then a year later, they're divorced. And then in that time, something else happens. They lose a parent, something, you know what I mean? It just is a lot of times none of us can handle a lot a a time. Our ability, totally. Our capacity.
Kind of goes back to that stress index we've talked about before.
Right.
Like multiple factors, more layers to our trauma.
Yes. Yeah. And so then you end up in this place that you're barely functioning, and it's not necessarily just because of this one incident, but then you've had all of this other fallout that has happened mm-hmm. that really has just is taxing your ability to function on a regular basis in a way that we weren't designed for, you know?